Today we are interviewing Michael Miller. He is the Chief of Strategic Initiatives at the Acton Institute, and he is more famous in Guatemala for being the host of the PovertyCure series. We are very excited that he visited Guatemala, and we are very honored to have him here as a guest on our program. Michael Miller is the author of Digital Contagion, and he is also writing a book now, as I guess a follow-up of the Poverty Cure and the Poverty Inc. series called Excluded: How Global Humanitarianism Excludes the Poor from Prosperity and Justice. Michael has lived in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. He has lectured internationally on many subjects such as moral philosophy, economic development, and social theory and entrepreneurship. You are often invited on radio and TV programs, and also a lot of your work has revolved around developing these ideas around poverty, right? And so we are very, very excited to be able to talk to you about this, because we have been working, as you know, with the Poverty Cure documentary. Instituto Fe y Libertad actually developed a version in Spanish because it had subtitles, but it wasn't in Spanish, so we dubbed it into Spanish, and we have been using this to start very fruitful discussions about poverty. And I am sure our audiences are really very curious how the idea came about to produce the documentary.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for having me on the podcast. And I also learned a lot from you when I was doing Poverty Cure, and we interviewed you about these things, and I quote you all the time. So I'm very honored to be here at the Institute Fe y Libertad and back in Guatemala. I think the idea for Poverty Cure and the Poverty Inc. project was, I guess, a general sense that the dominant models of how we think about caring. So first of all, we're called to care for the poor. Caring for the poor matters. It's a real problem. And millions and millions, billions of people really don't have as much access to prosperity as they should. And the dominant model of how we care for the poor was really a top-down social engineering approach. And I think some of that was understandable, right? So I'm very critical of it, but I think some of it was understandable. So at the end of World War II, there was this idea: we won the war. Now let's use social engineering and all the power of the state to win the peace. And meanwhile, you had like the Soviet Union with its 5-year plans, and Khrushchev's we're gonna crush you, and all of Europe, like England, for example, like Germany maybe is a little exception, but England, the United States were really in this kind of sense of planning. And then you had the power of Keynes and all these things. So the idea was, look, we're just gonna do these massive, large-scale projects. But it didn't really deliver what was hoped. And the late economist Peter Bauer, who was very influential, he said, look, aid has created the third world. And that what happens when aid comes in is it centralizes all the activity and energy around the political. And so the periphery doesn't get helped. And one of the things that we began to realize was, well, foreign aid sometimes can be helped. The rest of it will work, right? And I'll talk about that. But really, foreign aid is for an emergency situation. But poverty is not an emergency situation. It's a chronic problem. And we were using an emergency model for a chronic problem. And in fact, creating incentives for recipient countries, say in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia, to not build the institutions of justice. And so one of the things that so that's kind of the historical context. And then the personal, like the philosophical context was really that human beings are not objects. We're not objects to be manipulated or socially engineered. Human beings are subjects. And each of us wants to be the protagonist of our own story of development. And too often, out of a desire to help, we turned poor people into objects that we tried to solve their problems. And the last thing, I think that we had this idea of charity is just providing goods, but charity is much bigger than that. Charity is helping people to flourish. And so the thing that struck us as we were working on it, and of course talking to people like you, Carol, and so many other people we learned from, is that the main reason people are poor in the developing world is not because they just lack things. The main reason they're poor is because they lack the access to justice, of clear title to land, private property, rule of law, ability to participate in the economy, get their court case heard, that people in the West just take for granted. We think, oh, that's normal. And then like, we don't know why we're rich, and we don't know why people are poor. But the main reason, and everything, this is all complex, but the main reason people are rich is not because we're smart or great, it's because we have access to justice. And the main reason people are poor is they don't have access to justice. And we wanted to really highlight that issue, and we wanted to highlight the creative capacity of every human being, no matter what they look like or where they're from or what their economic status is. And those were the driving kind of forces of PovertyCure.
I'm really glad you said, well, it's complex, because I think PovertyCure's success, having used the tool for different audiences, I think the reason it's successful is because it doesn't talk down to the audience, and I think the whole documentary, and it's a 6-part series, it raises a lot of questions. It doesn't deny the complexity surrounding poverty. How did you go about designing the content?
So the complexity thing to, I think, address is really important. And one thing I often say is, good people can disagree about poverty, and there's no single solution. And I think that's another thing we wanted to get across, so one of the questions is like, how do we solve poverty? But the better question is, how do we create wealth? And so that's a complex question that a lot of people, all the books are trying to solve. So how do we thought about it in a couple of terms for building it. We wanted to address just some key issues. So we actually sat around at the Acton Institute and said, okay, what are the key things we want to discuss? What matters? And so we thought about that. And then we thought rhetorically, the first thing we need to do is acknowledge the problem. Because a lot of times, I think, especially those of us who are critical of the dominant model, we end up criticizing the dominant model before acknowledging this is a real problem and people are excluded. And so we did that. And then we wanted to just go through these institutions of justice that I talked about. So how do we think about private property? How do we think about rule of law? How do we think about access to business? But the other thing that was really important to us, both for the PovertyCure series and for the full-length documentary Poverty Inc., is that, how do I say this, that the dominant theme, which I'm repeating myself a little bit, but the dominant theme was that the person is at the center of the economy and that the person is a subject. And part of our whole vision was to present people as the subjects of their own development. And that was kind of a driving theme. Because, I'm from the United States, and in the US, we have a lot of poverty stuff. And a lot of times the way poor people are portrayed is like they're kind of weak and there's a fly or something. And it's to make us feel sorry so that we help. And I totally understand that. But we wanted to do something different. We wanted to show people with energy and capacity. And then the other thing is this was another driving force. Oftentimes we'll talk about, like, let's say foreign aid is used and it's used corruptly, right? So the dictator goes and buys a house in Switzerland, or the people who are supposed to be helping the children end up trafficking the children into like forced labor or something. Those things are a problem. Not because we think they're not bad, but we wanted to say, just even when it's used well, it ends up excluding the poor. And those were some of the themes and how we kind of framed it. Does that answer your question?
Yes. What was the most challenging thing about filming the series?
Oh, yeah. So much of it was hard.
You went all around the world.
Yeah. So, travel and leaving the family is always hard. That's a challenge. All of us had families, and so I think in filming, a couple of challenges. Finding stories is very difficult. So So this is like pretty much this is definitely behind the scenes. But so when you're doing pre-production, all right, for a film or for a story, let's say I want to do a film here in Guatemala. So, okay, I'm in Guatemala. I can talk to you. I can talk to people. Okay, and we get connections. Sometimes you fly in and you have a couple connections, and you get on the ground and you have 8 days, and you have to find stories. And so a lot of the things that you would do, we're starting a new film in the United States where we can go visit and come back, visit and come back. Well, you can't. It's really hard to go to Kenya or Rwanda, spend 8 days and come back 3 times. So you're really just a part of it, like praying that you find the right story and talk to people. And so that's part of it. And the other part is you have to, I think a lot of times people who are poor are used to having film crews come in and film them in a way of like, we want to use your story to inspire. Yeah. And I don't mean that in a bad, like, I mean, I don't think, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm saying that's, so like in Haiti once, they had people like we had cameras, some of our guys they're throwing rocks at them. Like, get out of here. And then our translator driver, he's like, no, this is the story they're telling. And they said, oh, okay, we'll talk to you. And so getting people to trust you and to be able to speak to your story. And then the other thing we did in film is we made a decision early on, a couple of aesthetic and then production decisions. So one of them was we used very small cameras. We used the Canon EOS 5Ds, the Canon 5D, which is about that big. And that was really helpful because it's one thing to come down and sit down with the camera, like sit down, there's lights on you and people kind of get nervous. So we shot with very small cameras. And the thing that those cameras are great for is you can really you don't need very much additional light. So when you're filming, you want to make it look beautiful. And sometimes you want light, but I said, let's just, as much as we can, never use light. So we didn't bring a studio in. And that was another help for us because we could go into a small space, into someone's house, use the Canon has the ability to bring extra light in the way it's done, and have the discussion, better. And then of course, like my Spanish is, I say más o menos, pero menos que más. So sometimes having a conversation and like really trying to make sure I'm having that communication when you were speaking in a foreign language, those were challenges. But it was, I mean, I learned, it was incredible. We learned a lot. We had a lot of partners who helped us. And also just, you don't expect maybe the answer. And then you think, oh, I wasn't going to do that. We have to do this now. Or you get somebody will explain something to you and you think, that's going in the film. No matter what, it's going in the film. So, okay, how are we going to build around that? Because that has to go in the film. Those are challenges too, but I think fun.
That's great. What was the most fun part?
Well, I guess there are probably two. I mean, but I worked with great colleagues. So like the director of photography that I worked with and other colleagues I worked with, we all got along. And so there was something exciting about going to a brand new place and having to solve all these problems and, working very hard. So that was, I think, fun and challenging to meet people and then to have your perspective shifted. And I can tell you about one of the things I learned that surprised me. But on the other fun side, I mean, having it finished was really fun. I mean, really fun when having it finished. And then with Poverty Inc., we got into over 60 film festivals. And so we were able to go to some film festivals in Greece and in Amsterdam and in the United States and various places and having people watch it. And I remember the first time I saw it was at a small festival in California that was very helpful to us. We actually won Best Documentary there. And I was in the stand. It was small, like 80 or 100 people. And I was sitting there and all of a sudden I still my heart started beating. And I was felt like, why am I nervous? And I realized this is the first time I've ever sat with people watching it. Usually I'm watching it on my computer. And so seeing people's reaction, like seeing people laugh. There's one scene in Poverty Inc. where this man, he's a retired psychiatrist. His name's Theodore Dalrymple. and he's talking about foreign aid, and he's criticizing foreign aid, and it's in Poverty Cure as well. The same scenes in both, and he says, he's critical, but he says, foreign aid's been very good to me. He said, it allowed me to travel. I bought my first house on foreign aid. And when you watch that scene with American audiences, everyone's like, kind of like nervous. When you watch that scene with African audiences, it's like, yeah, exactly. And the place erupts, right? And to see the different reactions of people. And then the other thing is have people come up to you and say, thank you for making this film. Like one of probably the great things is people would say, thank you for making this film. And they'd say, I knew there was something wrong, but I couldn't say it. Or the other is, I'm so proud to be like an African from this country. Or like you made me see, you made me realize like you presented people as not things. And so that was that was a blessing, because that's what we wanted to do. And that's what the director of photography and their whole team, it was this constant, we even challenged ourselves. We'd watch a section and we're like, we're not respecting people in this section. And so we cut the section and fix it. And so I don't know if that answers, but I learned so much. It was a great experience for me.
And one clip, Herman Chineri Hesse, he's a technology entrepreneur from Ghana.
Yep.
He says, "Oh, I know Bono, and I know these artists, and I told them that making concerts for poor people isn't going to cure poverty." And a few years later, Bono actually came out and said that the only solution to poverty was entrepreneurship and capitalism. And this is a quote from Bono: "Aid is just a stopgap. Commerce, entrepreneurial capitalism takes more people out of poverty than aid." And I think changing Bono's worldview is a product of your efforts in a way.
Well, I mean, I hope so. We put that clip in the film, but you were saying,
has there been other conversions or changes?
So on the Bono side, we found out he watched it. Okay, we just heard from somebody he watched it, and he said there's a lot of shared belief, and we were critical of Bono. So I actually, when I was in high school, I saw U2 in concert. Okay, I liked U2 and I liked Bono, and so did the director of photography. Both of us were like, we like U2. We're like kind of fans of U2. But we part of the reasons we critiqued Bono specifically is partially because of respect. Like, he's probably the most thoughtful guy, but he was so much part of the establishment, and it was kind of a manifestation of sentimentality. And so I think his shift. I mean, I think hopefully Poverty Cure and Poverty Inc. played a small role in this, but so many people that are in the film, like people like Magat Wade or Herman that you mentioned, or Dambisa Moyo, or James Shikwati, and what's his name, the Kenyan that Bono had a disagreement with him. His name will come to me. Andrew Moenda. There are a lot of people doing work on this, and we were just one voice among others. But because we were able to do a film and really show the voices of people saying this, I think it was very helpful. And a lot of people have told us, your film changed the way we think. It really helped us. It reframed the discussion in a way that we didn't do before. And I think maybe one of the main reasons for that is I'm critical of foreign aid. So the immediate, I'm kind of this curmudgeon who foreign aid's bad, and so I immediately come across as a person who doesn't care. And one of the things that we were able to do in the film is, I think, give a critique of foreign aid to show that it's not because we don't care, it's because we think we just have a different way of doing that. And I think the most important is that and this was a blessing, because I say this because people who I interviewed, like Herman or Magat Wade, right, they were in a sense writers of the film as much. Like, I was one of the main, like, there are three of us who were the main writers, but they were writers of the film in the sense that they shaped the film. Like, I remember Magat Wade saying, you can't talk about justice unless you say, the problem is not that we don't have laws. The problem is often we have too many laws. And you have to put this in the film. And so we put it in the film, right? And I think part of it is we were able to give voice. So often entrepreneur in the developing world is never heard. And so we were able to give voice to that. And that, I think, changed people's view, which I was very honored to be a part of.
You have great one-liners, like you
Yeah.
have to have a mind for the poor and not
Yeah.
just a heart
Yeah.
for the poor and things like. And the little girl who,
Yeah.
she's not the problem.
She's the solution.
She's the solution.
Right.
I think those one-liners are really.
Yeah. Can I tell you a quick story about that?
Yes.
So this is about the film. So that was in DR, in the Dominican Republic, and we went down. I gave a lecture there, and we met people. This is how, and they said, "Oh, we know some people up here, and this people up here." So we ended up filming, and there was a man, Jose was his name, and he was a cigar roller.
Okay.
And we were walking by. He's very like outgoing and cheerful, and so we said, "Can we film?" He said, "Yeah, sure." So we filmed him, and we talked to him, and he's like, "Here's a cigar." He's very nice. And then later, we were on this little street in Santiago area of the Dominican Republic. And we were in the little street, and it was kind of a poor street, and there were some soccer players over there, which we used for the rule of law section, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this little boy, about maybe 6 years old, 5 years, maybe no, probably 4 or 5 years old. He had no teeth, because he lost his teeth. And he was just like, ooh, in front of the camera. He's just funny. And like, I have little children too, so he kind of was funny. Like he was just this kind of goofy fellow and fun, right? Little boy. And so we took pictures of him, and then his little sister was there, et cetera. And it turns out these were the children of this cigar roller.
Oh.
And so we started talking to all the people on the street, and there was a very older man who you might remember. His face is very wrinkled, and he shows up and he's dancing. He let us take his picture. And so we used this footage, and then we filmed, and we went to different places. We went to Kenya, and we filmed, and we came back to the DR to do some final filming. And we said, let's go visit, see if we can find. So we went back to their street, and we saw them there, and they remembered us. It was like 2 years later, and I said, well, do you want to see some of the video we did? And so there's this. This is not in the film, but I have pictures where the boy who's now about 8, and I have children the same age, right? The boy's 8, he's kind of leaning on me, looking at the film, and his parents are right there, and the old guy is watching, and we have a picture of me with a computer showing them the film that we did, and they were all excited about it. But we got to learn from people and see and this was another thing that was striking. We showed another place in Africa, and that family in the DR is like, oh boy, they're so poor, we're so blessed. Right? And we're so blessed.
Yes.
So anyway, so those little things were like this human element that you got to do that and talk to people. And if I could say one other thing that struck me, I remember I was in Haiti, and we were critiquing Tom Shoes, their model. And I said to this economist named Daniel Jean-Louis, who's one of the main characters in the film, watch this ad and tell me what you think. And I had seen this ad about shoes and Tom Shoes, and I saw the economics problem in it. Mm-hmm. And I showed it to Daniel, and he said, there's no words to explain this. He said, like, by saying this, he must mean, like, he implies that he wants us to be poor forever. Like, no one wants to be a beggar for life. And it was this very powerful moment. But what struck me is, like, I can tell you, I was I taught philosophy, and we're subjects, not objects, But I missed it. Like, I didn't even see that part. Mm-hmm. I was just looking at the economics part. And there were these moments when you realize, oh, like, I think I know stuff, but I'm just missing big sections. And learning that through doing the film was really great, very helpful. And luckily I had this incredible team of people who worked with, and then all the people who helped, and people who watched it, and people who gave feedback, and people like you, who as I said, I quote all the time, gave me language and insight that we were able to, over time, like, work into that whole story. So it was a great experience.
What's next?
So,
because I must confess, the last time we used it to teach, you can tell the documentary is a little. It's old.
I had hair. I was in it, and I had hair.
It's still very relevant.
Yeah.
The message is valuable, but there's something about new audiences and what they expect. From documentaries.
Right.
It's a little.
Yep.
You can tell it wasn't filmed yesterday.
Yes, that's correct. So Some parts, so there's actually a technical part. Some of the film was actually filmed with these like kind of larger Panasonics that they get a lower resolution. So we just don't have the clarity. And so there's just a technical issue. Some of the things are, I think I agree with you, they're evergreen relevant. It's sad, but the exact same problem that we had. But so it's actually now, it finished 11 years ago, are exactly the same. So some of they're very relevant. But I know I watched it not too long ago at something and I thought, wow, this looks old. We got to fix this. So, I think what's next is, well, we're actually starting a brand new documentary on poverty in the United States. A lot of people in the United States said they would watch it. And they said, this is kind of like what happens here, but also very different. Because I would say, as I said earlier, the reason people are poor is not because they lack things or stuff, but because they lack access to justice. Well, in the United States, it's not because they lack things. It's not even necessarily that they lack access to justice, although sometimes that's the case, okay? But not the same way. It's like they can get private property. They can get their court case ready. It's that they lack this whole thing of what you could call social capital. They lack access to information, to people, to help them to bridge up. And there's huge breakdown of the family in the United States. There's the decreasing social capital. The state has crowded out a lot of things. And the market has crowded out a lot of things. So that things that used to be provided by mutual aid fraternal associations are now either provided simply by the state or simply by the market. And both of those things can impact, create individualism. And so if you're in upper middle class, you can navigate your way around it. But if you're in the bottom, even 50%, things are a lot harder. So we're going to deal with the questions of the United States, but we're also starting a new center at the Acton Institute that's going to deal with like social capital and poverty and development. And we're going to do some rejuvenation of PovertyCure and hopefully do a little bit more filming in that area. Our focus will be the U.S., but we're going to focus on that and still kind of rejuvenate some of that work with PovertyCure and hopefully continue to maybe tell stories. And my colleague, Simon Cianca, who is the director of photography, for years we've said, we would love to do a follow-up on Poverty Inc. and PovertyCure, where we also told like actual stories of success. Like this is how you navigate that. And almost like a Netflix series where you're seeing people going through challenges, but also kind of overcoming them, so that we're not just repeating, here are the challenges, but here are some of the ways that people have actually overcome them. And this is like a inspiration to others. So that's hopefully we can do that, but that's one of our hopes, but we'll see. We'll see.
Okay, well,
do you have any suggestions for us? What do you think we should do?
Well, I found that the PovertyCure network that you set up to accompany the documentary held promise, and the idea of concentrating a lot of people who are working on poverty issues and thinking about poverty issues. I would love to see more come out of that, maybe.
Good. Well, I
think you will.
That's one of our. So we just came back from the Antigua Forum, where we talked about this new center and a network, and a lot of the work was focused on this network. So that's what we're going to be going back and seeing how, because I think you're right. I mean, we built this very nice network, but I don't think we utilized it as much as it could be. So I do think it's a place where things can develop, and also more stories and more ideas. Because in one sense, there's a sociologist, Peter Berger. He talks about this idea called plausibility structure, that there's what's possible, there's ideas, and then there's what's plausible. And I think when you create a network of organizations, people say, "Oh, I can do that. That's plausible. I can make that happen." And so I think that is good. I'm glad you said that. Yeah. So we want to do that. We want to do a network.
It also makes the documentary come alive in a way that you keep the dialogue going.
I think the importance of the network and the importance of these discussions is, and we talked about this earlier when you gave us a tour of University of Francisco Marroquín, that you see all these people and all these ideas, and people have been working through and thinking through complex problems, not just the 20th century, but I mean all this wisdom that we have. And I know this, what I'll say is a bit unnuanced. I'll know it sounds maybe a bit harsh, but I don't think it's wrong. I think it's, that so much of the dominant models of how we think about the economy and family and consumer, they're just so rooted in this very reductionist, technocratic way of seeing the world that's just boring it doesn't take humanity seriously. It doesn't take society seriously. It doesn't take embedded complexity seriously. It's just technocratic, boring, and wrong. And so, but it's the kind of easy way. That's the dominant model. So I think we have to push back against that by bringing lots of flowers of resistance to that. And I think this is something that I know you're doing here, and it's yeah, I think it's important. I think that sometimes we get discouraged, but when you think about all the knowledge that's left off the table, if we can bring that back in and wrestle with these things, I think it'll get people inspired to realize there's a better way than this kind of top-down kind of managed capitalism model that we have right now.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for this behind-the-scenes look at
Oh, thank you.
PovertyCure. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will really enjoy learning more about the documentary and how it was produced. And I know we are only just now beginning to feel the effects of what you planted, the seeds you planted. And I think many people's views on poverty will change and have changed, and their understanding of human flourishing as well. So thank you so much for this interview. And
thank you.
For more information regarding Instituto Fe y Libertad, its work, activities, and what was discussed in this episode, you can visit our website, feylibertad.org, our sites on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining us.